Picture this: the mist hangs low over the Scottish Highlands, clinging to ancient hills like a ghostly shroud. Somewhere in that fog, the echo of clashing steel rings out, a sound that once defined these lands far more than any bagpipe melody or castle ruin ever could. We all know the famous battles, the names etched in history books, but what if I told you that Scotland's real story wasn't written on open battlefields, but in the shadows? Beyond the well-trod tales of William Wallace or Robert the Bruce lies a hidden world of secret wars, clan against clan, ambition against tradition, blood against oath. These were conflicts fought not for crowns, but for survival, honor, and power in a landscape where loyalty shifted like the Highland weather. This is the world we're stepping into today. You're about to discover 23 conflicts that history nearly forgot, clashes buried under centuries of dust and deliberate silence. Imagine rival chieftains meeting under cover of darkness, alliances forged and broken with a handshake, and betrayals so deep they reshaped clans for generations. This wasn't just about who held the land, it was about who controlled the future of Scotland itself, one stealthy move at a time, and the stakes, they couldn't have been higher. Reputations, lineages, even entire ways of life hung in the balance. We're not talking about simple skirmishes here, we're unraveling political chess games where the players wore plaids and carried daggers instead of scepters. So why does this matter now? Because these secret wars didn't just vanish. They live on in the stories whispered in glens, in the stubborn pride of family names, and in the landscapes that still guard their truths. This is a journey into the heart of medieval mystery, where fact and legend blur and every rock and river has a tale to tell. I invite you to lean in and listen closely, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see Scotland forever. Now, let's turn our attention to one of the most fascinating and prolonged conflicts in Scottish history, a silent struggle for power that unfolded not with grand armies marching across the lowlands, but through whispers in royal courts, secret treaties signed by candlelight, and the quiet dominance of the sea lanes. This was the shadow war waged by Clan Donald, the mighty lords of the Isles, who for generations operated as near-sovereign rulers in the western seaboard, effectively creating a kingdom within a kingdom. While the Scottish crown focused its attention on battles with England and controlling the clans of the Central Highlands, the lords of the Isles built a maritime empire in the Hebrides, answering to no one but themselves. Their power was so vast and so quietly administered that at times it seemed as though Scotland had two monarchs, one seated in Edinburgh or Stirling, and the other holding court in the mist-shrouded castles of Islay or Finlaggan. What made their rule possible was not just military strength but cunning strategy. They understood that true power often lies in the unseen, in control of trade routes, in the loyalty of allied clans, and in the careful forging of political marriages that wove a web of influence across the Highlands and Islands. They married into powerful families like the MacLeods, the MacLeods, and the Campbells, binding them to their cause not through fear alone, but through mutual interest and shared blood. This network of alliances functioned like a hidden government, one that could mobilize forces or withhold taxes from the crown with a simple command. Their fleet of Burlen's swift, sturdy galleys patrolled the sea routes, allowing them to move troops, collect rents, and project power with a speed that land-bound monarchs could only envy. This naval dominance meant that the Scottish crown's authority often simply stopped at the shoreline. Perhaps most daring of all was their willingness to play a dangerous double game with Scotland's greatest enemy, England. While publicly swearing fealty to the Scottish king, the lords of the Isles were secretly negotiating with the English crown, offering military support or promising to open a second front in the Highlands during times of war. In 1474, John MacDonald, the fourth and last Lord of the Isles, formalized this treachery by signing the Treaty of Westminster with King Edward IV of England, a document that promised mutual aid against the Scottish monarch. This was more than rebellion. It was a bold bid to redraw the map of power in Britain, one that would have seen the Lords of the Isles recognized as independent rulers under English protection. Though the treaty was eventually discovered and the lordship officially forfeited, the spirit of independence it represented lingered for generations, a ghost of what might have been. The crown could strip away a title, but it could not so easily erase a century of autonomous rule, or the deep-seated belief that the Lords of the Isles answered to a different law altogether. But that web of power maintained by the Lords of the Isles was not unbreakable, and the most devastating fractures often came from within their own sphere of influence. The bonds of alliance, carefully woven through marriage and mutual interest, could unravel in an instant over a perceived slight, proving that in the Highlands, honor was a currency more valuable than gold and far more easily spent. This brings us to one of the most legendary and tragic feuds, a conflict that demonstrates how the grand political schemes of the Lords could be utterly undone by a single moment of personal insult. It was a clash not between a clan and the crown, but between two of the most powerful families in the Hebrides, the MacDonalds of Skye and the MacLeods of Dunvegan. The spark that lit this long and bitter war was not a disputed land title or a broken treaty, but something far more human, a public humiliation. Sometime in the late 1570s, the chief of Clan MacDonald of Sleat on the Isle of Skye hosted a grand wedding for his daughter. It was a major social event, a gathering of the most powerful figures in the islands, intended to celebrate and strengthen alliances. Among the honored guests was the elderly chief of Clan MacLeod, Ian MacLeod, who traveled from his stronghold at Dunvegan Castle to attend. According to the stories passed down through generations, the MacDonald host, perhaps feeling arrogant or simply negligent, committed a grave breach of Highland hospitality. When the feast was served, the choicest cuts of meat were presented to the most prestigious guests, but the MacLeod chief was snubbed, given a portion considered inferior and insulting, like a fatty chunk of meat intended for a person of low status. In the culture of the Gael, where respect was everything, this was not a simple oversight. It was a deliberate and explosive act of contempt. The message was clear. The MacDonalds no longer viewed the MacLeods as their equals. Humiliated before the assembled nobility of the Isles, the old MacLeod chief rose from the table without a word and left the celebration, his silence more threatening than any outburst of anger. He returned to Dunvegan and the fuse was lit. The retaliation was not immediate, but it was inevitable and brutal. The MacLeods bided their time, waiting for the perfect moment to answer the insult with a force that would echo for generations. That moment came when a group of MacDonalds, oblivious to the storm brewing, traveled across the narrow channel to the MacLeod-owned island of Wyre for a peaceful purpose, perhaps to graze their cattle. There they were ambushed by MacLeod warriors. The men were killed, and according to some of the grimmer versions of the tale, their bodies were butchered and arranged in a horrific parody of the spoiled wedding feast. This act of savage symbolism ignited a full-scale guerrilla war across Skye and the outer islands. What followed was not a series of pitched battles, but a relentless cycle of secret raids, burned crofts, stolen livestock, and midnight murders. It was a conflict fought in the misty glens and secluded coves where trust vanished and no one was safe. Families were torn apart, and communities that had lived side by side for generations now viewed each other with suspicion and hatred. The feud reached its horrifying climax years later with an event that would become seared into Highland memory, the Massacre of Ige. A group of MacDonalds seeking refuge from the ongoing violence had hidden in a secret cave on the island. The MacLeods, in pursuit, discovered their hiding place. Instead of engaging them in fight, they simply sealed the cave's entrance with a massive fire, suffocating every man, woman, and child inside. This act of total annihilation was so chilling that it shocked even a region hardened by violence. It was a statement that in this secret war, there would be no quarter given and no line too brutal to cross. The legacy of the spoiled wedding was not just decades of bloodshed, but a deep and lasting schism that weakened the entire power structure of the Lords of the Isles from within, proving that the greatest threat to their domain often came not from the crown in Edinburgh, but from the pride burning in the hearts of their own allies. Yet if the massacre on Ig represents the brutal, raw violence of clan honor, the events that unfolded a century and a half later show how that same ancient enmity had evolved, donning the powdered wigs and formal procedures of the modern world to achieve the same bloody ends. We now travel from the misty isolation of the Hebrides to the year 1752, in the tense, politically charged aftermath of the Jacobite uprisings. The Battle of Culloden was 6 years past. The Highland way of life was being systematically dismantled by the British government, and in this atmosphere of suspicion and repression, a single gunshot on a lonely road would ignite one of Scotland's most enduring mysteries, a killing so shrouded in political intrigue that it continues to provoke debate to this day. This is the Appin Murder. On the afternoon of May 14, 1752, Colin Campbell of Glenure, a government factor tasked with managing estates seized from Jacobite sympathizers, was riding through the wood of Lettermore near Ballachulish. He was shot dead by a sniper hidden in the trees above. The assassin's bullet found its mark with chilling precision, and Campbell fell from his horse mortally wounded. His last words, reportedly, were to take care of his wife and children. In the immediate panic, the killer vanished into the rugged landscape, leaving behind only smoke and a profound silence. The murder of a prominent government agent in broad daylight was not just a crime. It was an act of open defiance, a direct challenge to the Crown's authority in a region still simmering with Jacobite resentment. The government in Edinburgh was furious and demanded swift justice, not merely to find a killer, but to make a devastating example. All suspicion immediately fell upon the local clan who had most suffered under Campbell's administration, the Stuarts of Appin. Their lands had been placed under Campbell's control, and he had been zealously, some would say cruelly, evicting Stuart tenants in favor of those loyal to the government. To the Stuarts, Colin Campbell was the face of their oppression, a hated symbol of their clan's dispossession. The manhunt that followed was less about finding the true culprit and more about pinning the blame on a convenient and politically satisfying target. The government's investigation was led by other Campbells, creating an immediate and glaring conflict of interest. They quickly arrested James Stuart, known in Gaelic as Sumas Ajaitlin James of the Glen. He was a respected, though not chiefly, member of the Appin Stuarts, a tacksman who had been openly critical of Campbell's actions. He became the perfect pawn. What followed was a judicial farce that laid bare the raw prejudice of the era. James Stuart was transported to the court in Inverurie, the symbolic heart of Campbell power. The courtroom was a spectacle of partiality. The presiding judge was the Duke of Argyll, chief of Clan Campbell. The jury was packed with 15 Campbells. It was, by any measure, a show trial designed to deliver a predetermined verdict. The prosecution's case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence and the coached testimony of a known liar, a man who claimed James had enlisted him for the murder. No murder weapon was ever produced, no credible eyewitness placed James at the scene, and he provided a solid alibi for his whereabouts that day. Despite this, the Campbell jury took only minutes to find him guilty. James Stuart was sentenced to death by hanging, and his body was to be publicly displayed in a gibbet for years as a gruesome warning to any who would defy the Crown's rule. On November 8, 1752, James Stuart was executed on a knoll overlooking the Ballachulish ferry. From the scaffold, he maintained his absolute innocence, declaring in a firm voice, "I am so clear of this crime that I forgive those who have taken my life." His body hung in chains for over 2 years, rusting in the sea air, a stark and terrifying monument to the power of clan-based political vengeance dressed in the robes of the law. The true identity of the marksman who killed Colin Campbell remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Most historians agree that James was almost certainly innocent, a sacrificial lamb offered up to appease the government's rage. The real assassin was likely Alan Breck Stewart, a charismatic Jacobite fugitive for whom James had once posted bail. Alan Breck vanished after the shooting, escaping to France and forever sealing the truth of what happened in the wood of Lettermore. The Appin murder transcends a simple whodunit. It stands as the ultimate expression of the secret wars, demonstrating how centuries of clan rivalry had simply found new, more sophisticated weapons. The battlefield was no longer a glen but a courtroom, the claymore replaced by a legal document, and the victory was measured not in land taken but in a rival clansman swinging from a rope. It was a cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless demonstration that even in the age of reason, the old Highland maxim still held true. The deadliest conflicts are often the ones fought not in the open, but in the shadows of power and prejudice. Yet if the Appin murder shows how clan rivalry adapted to the courtrooms of the 18th century, it pales in comparison to the sheer scale of a far older and more devastating conflict, one where the Scottish crown itself declared war not on a single individual, but on an entire people, erasing their very name from the law. This was the fate of Clan Gregor, a saga of persecution so profound it forced a whole community into the shadows for generations, sparking a secret war of survival that was both heartbreaking and defiant. Their story begins not with a single act of violence, but with a piece of parchment signed by a king. In April 1603, King James VI of Scotland, who had just also become James I of England, issued a royal proclamation that made the very name MacGregor illegal. To be born a MacGregor was now a crime punishable by death. Their lands were forfeit, their citizenship revoked. They were to be hunted, dispossessed, and exterminated. But why such a drastic and brutal decree? The official reason was their alleged lawlessness and their role in a recent bloody battle against the Clan Colquhoun. The truth, however, was far more coldly political. The MacGregors were a formidable warrior clan whose ancestral lands sat on strategically valuable ground in the volatile region between the Lowlands and Highlands. They were in the way. Their eradication was a convenient way for the crown to reward loyal allies like the Campbells and the Campbells of Breadalbane with new territories, and to demonstrate the king's absolute authority over the entire realm by breaking one of its most fiercely independent groups. Overnight, the MacGregors became ghosts in their own homeland. To simply exist, they were forced to abandon everything that defined them. They could not use their name, wear their tartan, or play their pipes. They could not gather in groups larger than 4. They dispersed, seeking refuge with sympathetic neighboring clans or melting into the most remote and inaccessible corners of the glens. Many adopted new surnames to survive, taking on the names of their protectors like Campbell or Murray, or choosing simple, common names like Brown or Smith. They became the children of the mist, a poetic but painfully accurate description of a people who lived as fleeting, half-seen figures, always watching for the approach of government soldiers or bounty hunters who could earn a reward for a MacGregor head. This was not a temporary hardship. It was a state of being that would last for 175 years, a relentless test of will and identity that spanned multiple generations. But this proscription did not extinguish the MacGregor spirit. It simply forced their culture and their resistance underground, transforming it into a secret war waged in silence and shadow. Their resistance became one of memory and clandestine ceremony. In hidden clearings deep in the forests or in secluded mountain passes known only to them, they would risk everything to hold secret gatherings. Here, away from the ears of informants and the eyes of soldiers, they could briefly be themselves. They would speak their true names, sing their old songs in Gaelic, and pass their history and genealogy down to their children by word of mouth, ensuring that the knowledge of who they were would not die even if they themselves were killed. This oral tradition became their most powerful weapon against oblivion. Their chiefs, now fugitives with prices on their heads, could no longer lead from castles but instead directed their people through a covert network of messengers and safe houses, operating as the nerve center of a silent rebellion whose sole objective was continued existence. Inevitably, this resistance also took a more violent form. Some MacGregors, with nothing left to lose, turned to what the crown called banditry, but what they saw as reclaiming their due. They would raid the farms and herds of the landlords who had taken their lands, a desperate form of economic warfare to feed their starving families and to symbolically strike back at the system that sought to erase them. The most famous of these outlaw figures was Rob Roy MacGregor, who, though often using his mother's surname of Campbell, was fiercely proud of his MacGregor ancestry. His legendary exploits outwitting his enemies, redistributing wealth, and evading capture made him a folk hero to the common people and a terrifying specter to the authorities. He was the living embodiment of the clan's refusal to be broken, a very public and defiant figure who proved that even an outlawed people could command respect and fear. The proscription of the MacGregors was finally lifted in 1774, long after the reasons for it had faded into history, but the legacy of those centuries in the shadows left an indelible mark, forging a clan identity renowned for its resilience, its deep, almost sacred sense of kinship, and a fierce pride that was tempered in the fires of persecution. Their secret war was ultimately a victory, not of conquest, but of sheer, unyielding endurance. But the calculated legal destruction of Clan Gregor and the judicial murder of James Stewart both trace their lineage back to an even older and more chilling blueprint for this kind of shadow warfare, an event so notorious that its very name has become synonymous with betrayal. To understand the depths of political ruthlessness in medieval Scotland, we must travel back to the year 1440, to the Great Hall of Edinburgh Castle, where a scene of festive celebration was about to be transformed into one of the most infamous murders in Scottish history. This was the Black Dinner. The power of the Black Douglas clan had grown so immense that it rivaled the crown itself. They commanded vast estates, loyal armies, and a network of alliances that made them the true power in the southern lowlands. To the young King James II, a mere boy of 10, and his regents, the Douglases were not subjects but a clear and present danger to the stability of the throne. An open war against them would have been long, bloody, and uncertain. Instead, the king's advisors, led by Sir William Crichton, the Chancellor of Scotland, chose a path of deceitful efficiency. They extended an invitation to the 16-year-old Earl of Douglas, William, and his younger brother, David, to join the king at Edinburgh Castle for a lavish feast. It was presented as a great honor, a gesture of reconciliation and royal favor meant to bind the young earl to his boy king. Despite any misgivings, the Douglas brothers, accompanied by a small retinue, entered the castle under the promise of safe conduct. The dinner began as a grand affair. The two young nobles dined at the high table alongside the king himself, treated as esteemed guests of honor. The hall was filled with music and the clatter of plates, a picture of medieval camaraderie. But as the feast drew to a close, the mood shifted with terrifying speed. According to the most common account of the story, the head of a black bull, a symbol of death, was dramatically thrown onto the table. This was the signal. Armed guards flooded the hall, seizing the young earl and his brother. Their pleas for mercy were met with cold indifference. A mock trial was hastily convened on the spot, condemning the boys for treason. There, in the heart of the royal castle, under the pretense of law and before the eyes of their child king, the two Douglas brothers were dragged out into the courtyard and brutally beheaded. Their crime was not any action they had taken, but the immense power they had inherited. The shockwaves from this single act of treachery were immediate and profound. It was a declaration that the rules of chivalry and the sacred code of hospitality meant nothing when weighed against political expediency. The elimination of the young earls was a masterstroke in the crown's secret war, effectively decapitating the Black Douglas leadership in one swift, bloody move. While it did not instantly destroy the clan, a relative would eventually claim the title and continue the fight. It broke their momentum and demonstrated the crown's willingness to employ any means necessary to secure its power. The Black Dinner, alongside a similar betrayal of the clan MacDonald at a feast in Inverness decades later, entered Highland folklore as the ultimate warning against trusting the promises of kings. It set a dark precedent that would be echoed for centuries. In Scotland, the most decisive battles were often fought not with armies on the field, but with daggers under the table. And if the Black Dinner stands as a chilling example of royal treachery within castle walls, the most infamous act of betrayal in all of Scottish history would occur 2 centuries later, not in a royal hall, but in a humble glen where the sacred laws of Highland hospitality were weaponized for a state-sanctioned massacre. This is the story of Glencoe, an event so deeply etched into the national consciousness that its very name remains a byword for perfidy and cold-blooded murder. It was February 1692, and the Highland winter held the valley of Glencoe in a fierce, frozen grip. For 12 days, a company of 120 soldiers from the Earl of Argyll's regiment had been guests of the MacDonalds of Glencoe. Their commander was Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon, a man related to the MacDonalds by marriage and, more importantly, a man who had shared their food, their drink, and the warmth of their hearts. In the culture of the Highlands, this was not a casual arrangement, it was a sacred bond. The host was obligated to offer protection, and the guest was bound by honor to do no harm. For nearly 2 weeks, this ancient contract was upheld. The soldiers and the clansmen drank together, played cards, and talked. The MacDonald chief, Mac-Ian, treated Captain Campbell as a friend and a respected companion. But this entire scene was a monstrous lie. The soldiers were not there on a peaceful garrison duty. They were the instruments of a secret, devastating order issued from the highest levels of government in London. The MacDonalds, like all clans, had been required to swear an oath of allegiance to the new monarchs, William and Mary, by a strict deadline. Chief Mac-Ian, an elderly man, had set out through brutal winter whether to make his pledge, but due to a series of bureaucratic errors and deliberate misdirection by officials who despised his clan, he had sworn the oath a few days late. This technicality was seized upon by the Scottish Secretary of State, John Dalrymple, who saw a golden opportunity. He wanted to make a bloody example of a Highland clan to crush the spirit of Jacobitism once and for all, and the MacDonalds of Glencoe, a small clan with a reputation for cattle raiding, were the perfect target. King William himself signed the order, which chillingly instructed that the MacDonalds be cut off root and branch, specifying that the action must be a surprise attack to maximize its terror. So in the early hours of February 13th, while a blizzard raged outside, the soldiers who had broken bread with the MacDonalds now prepared to break their trust. At 5 in the morning, Captain Campbell gave the signal. All across the glen, in the various cottages where they were billeted, the government troops turned on their hosts. It was not a battle, it was a systematic slaughter of the unprepared and the unsuspecting. Chief Mac-Ian was shot dead in his bed by soldiers he had welcomed into his own home. His wife had the rings ripped from her fingers before she was thrown into the snow, where she would later die of exposure. Men, women, and children were dragged from their homes and murdered in the freezing darkness. The soldiers had been instructed to leave no survivors to ensure the name MacDonald of Glencoe was utterly erased. Those who managed to escape fled uphill into the storm with little more than the nightclothes on their backs. It's estimated that 38 MacDonalds were killed outright, but the true death toll was far higher as many more perished in the snow, their bodies lost to the elements. The massacre itself was horrific, but its true, calculated cruelty lay in its method. This was psychological warfare designed by the state to shatter the very foundation of Highland society. By using a Campbell regiment to carry out the deed, the government cynically played upon the ancient rivalry between the two clans, giving the event a superficial cloak of clan feud. But this was no feud, it was a cold political execution. The violation of hospitality was the core of its terror. The message sent to every clan from Edinburgh to London was stark and unmistakable. Not even your own hearth is safe. The ancient codes that had governed life for centuries meant nothing against the raw power of the modern state. You could be murdered by the very man you called a friend on the orders of a king you had sworn to obey. The public outcry that followed was immense, even in an age accustomed to violence. A parliamentary inquiry in Edinburgh later declared the massacre an act of murder, pinning the blame primarily on Dalrymple. But no one was ever punished. The king, whose signature was on the order, simply dismissed Dalrymple from his post, allowing him to retire to his estates. For the Highlands, Glencoe was a watershed moment. It signaled the end of an era where clan conflicts had their own rules and their own honor. The state had now demonstrated it would not engage in honorable warfare. It would employ treachery as policy, using the bonds of community itself as the weapon for its own control. Yet if the treachery of Glencoe demonstrated the state's willingness to shatter sacred codes for political control, another form of shadow warfare was already simmering across Scotland, one that divided communities and even families from within. This conflict wasn't fought over land or titles, but over the human soul itself, as the Protestant Reformation swept through the nation in the 16th century, tearing apart the very fabric of faith and loyalty. For the powerful Catholic clans of the North and South, this religious upheaval was not an abstract theological debate, it was an existential threat. To remain true to their ancient faith meant risking everything, their lands, their status, and their lives. And so they adapted, launching a secret war of resistance fought not with broadswords, but with whispered prayers, hidden symbols, and clandestine alliances that stretched across the sea to the courts of Europe's most powerful Catholic monarchs. In the rugged northeast, the Gordons, led by the formidable George Gordon, Earl of Huntly, became the de facto champions of the old faith. Huntly was a figure of immense power and contradiction, a loyal subject of the Scottish crown, who also served as the unofficial general of Scotland's Catholic resistance. His strategy was a masterclass in calculated ambiguity. Publicly, he would pay lip service to the Protestant regime when necessary, maintaining his position and influence at court. Privately, however, he operated a vast underground network of support. Priests who dared not show their faces in public were given sanctuary in Gordon castles, saying Mass for small groups of trusted loyalists in secret chambers and concealed courtyards. The family's stronghold at Strathbogie became a nerve center for this covert operation, a place where the flame of Catholicism was kept burning behind stone walls and guarded gates. Huntly's power was such that he could effectively create a Catholic state within a state, a region where the king's Protestant laws were simply ignored and the old rituals continued undisturbed. Similarly, in the volatile Scottish borders, the Maxwells wielded their power with a fierce devotion to Catholicism that made them a constant thorn in the side of the Protestant establishment. Their mighty fortress, Caerlaverock Castle, stood as a stark symbol of defiance, its imposing walls guarding not just a family but a faith. The Maxwell chiefs, like Lord John Maxwell, were experts in the art of passive resistance. They would delay, obfuscate, and outright refuse to implement religious reforms in their territories. When government agents were sent to enforce the new order, they would find themselves stonewalled by a wall of silence or met with unfortunate accidents on lonely roads. The Maxwells protected a network of recusants, ordinary people who refused to attend Protestant services, shielding them from fines and persecution. This created a safe haven where the Catholic community could survive, if not thrive, under the protection of a clan that answered to a higher authority than the Edinburgh Parliament. The tools of this resistance were ingenuity and secrecy. Since public worship was forbidden, Catholics developed ingenious methods to practice their faith. Mass stones, large, flat rocks in remote, secluded locations like hidden glens or dense forests, became outdoor altars. worshippers would be summoned not by the ringing of a bell, but by a coded message or a signal fire on a distant hill. These gatherings were held at dawn or under the cover of darkness, with lookouts posted to warn of approaching soldiers. The priests who served these underground congregations were equally stealthy, often disguised as traveling merchants or peddlers, their sacred vestments and communion wine hidden among their wares. They became known as heather priests, named for the wild landscape that concealed their movements, and their bravery ensured the sacraments continued to reach the faithful. Perhaps the most daring aspect of this secret war was its international dimension. Catholic clans like the Hamiltons, the Gordons, and the Maxwells did not see themselves as rebels against Scotland, but as loyal members of a global Catholic community. They maintained clandestine correspondence with powerful foreign powers, most notably France and Spain, seeking financial support, and they hoped military intervention. Coded letters were carried by trusted agents across the North Sea, pleading for aid to restore the true faith to Scotland. These alliances were a dangerous double game, balancing on the edge of treason. When a Spanish ship wrecked off the coast of Aberdeen in 1588, its treasure and weapons were swiftly seized by the Gordons, not for personal gain, but to fund their resistance, a clear act of defiance that showed their foreign loyalties were more than just words. This long, silent struggle culminated in periods of open rebellion, such as the Rising of the North in 1569, where Catholic nobles made a desperate armed bid to restore the old religion. Though ultimately crushed, these rebellions proved that the spirit of resistance was far from broken. The secret war of the Catholic clans ultimately ensured that despite centuries of persecution, Catholicism never truly vanished from Scotland. It was preserved in the hidden chapels of great houses, in the oral traditions of families, and in the stubborn endurance of communities that refused to let their faith die. Their story is a testament to the fact that the most potent conflicts are not always the loudest. Sometimes the most powerful resistance is conducted in a whisper, passed from one generation to the next in the silent, steadfast hearts of those who simply refuse to forget. Yet beneath the familiar narrative of clan against clan in the Hebrides lay a far older, deeper cultural divide, a shadow war of identity that stretched back to the age of Vikings. For the mighty MacDonalds, lords of the Isles, and their formidable rivals, the MacLeods of Skye and Harris, their power was built upon a unique and deliberately cultivated heritage. They were Norse Gaels. Long after the Norse crown had officially ceded the Hebrides to Scotland in 1266, these clans maintained secret cultural and political ties to their Scandinavian past, creating a hidden front in their struggles where Norse influence was a silent partner in their Gaelic conflicts. This wasn't just a matter of old bloodlines, it was a conscious strategy, a way to leverage a distinct identity to gain advantage, playing a delicate double game between Edinburgh and the Old Norse powers across the sea. The evidence of this dual allegiance was etched into the very landscape they ruled. While they spoke Gaelic and followed the customs of the Highland chiefs, their architectural ambition echoed the Norse love for formidable coastal fortresses. Dunvegan Castle, the ancient seat of the MacLeods, wasn't built on a strategic hill inland but perched on a sea-swept basalt outcrop, its access dominated by the water, just like the Viking strongholds of old. Similarly, the MacDonald power base at Finlaggan on Islay was a complex of islands within a loch, a defensive design that prioritized naval control and quick escape to the sea, a classic Scandinavian tactical preference. Their ships, the swift Berlins that allowed them to project power across their maritime empire, were direct descendants of the Viking longship, designed for speed, raiding, and dominating the sea lanes that connected them to the Norse world as much as to the Scottish mainland. This connection was most powerfully maintained through trade and culture. While officially part of Scotland, the economy of the Lords of the Isles operated on a North Sea axis. Their merchants traded dried fish, wool, and hides not with Edinburgh or Glasgow, but with ports in Norway and the Hanseatic League, bringing back timber, iron, and luxury goods that bypassed the Scottish Crown's economy entirely. This independent trade network fostered a cultural exchange that kept Norse customs alive. On Lewis, under MacLeod control, the local legal system continued to use feudal law, a Norse framework for land ownership that was completely separate from the Scottish feudal system well into the 16th century. It was a quiet, persistent rejection of the Crown's legal authority, a statement that in the Isles, different rules applied. The most explosive aspect of this hidden allegiance, however, was military. During periods of open conflict with the Scottish Crown, the Lords of the Isles were not above sending envoys across the North Sea to secretly solicit support from the King of Norway. They offered to switch their nominal allegiance back to the Norwegian Crown in exchange for military aid against their Scottish overlords. This was the ultimate insurance policy, a threat they could hold over the King of Scots. The knowledge that the Hebrides could once again become a base for Norse power, opening a second front in any war with England, was a chilling prospect in Edinburgh. It gave the Lords of the Isles a bargaining chip that purely Gaelic clans simply did not possess, allowing them to negotiate from a position of strength that infuriated the Scottish monarchy. This Norse Gaelic identity also fueled their intense rivalry with each other. The MacDonalds, claiming descent from the legendary Sumald, a half-Norse, half-Gaelic warlord, saw themselves as the true heirs to this hybrid kingdom. The MacLeods, whose name itself derives from the Old Norse Eljota, proudly traced their lineage back to the Norse kings of Man. Their fights over land and influence were, on another level, a contest over whose version of Norse Gaelic supremacy would dominate the seaways. When a MacDonald raided a MacLeod coast, it wasn't just a clan attack. It was a continuation of the ancient Viking method of resolving disputes through shows of naval strength and plunder, a cultural practice that had been seamlessly adopted into the Gaelic framework of cattle raiding and honor feuds. This shadow war finally began to fade in the 15th and 16th centuries as the power of unified Scotland grew and the influence of a distant Norway waned. But its legacy was profound. It demonstrated that the most complex battles are often fought over identity itself. The MacDonalds and MacLeods were masters of this game, wielding their Norse heritage not as a forgotten relic, but as a living, strategic tool, one that allowed them to navigate the treacherous politics of medieval Scotland with a unique and potent advantage, forever keeping both their Gaelic rivals and the Scottish Crown guessing about where their true loyalties lay. Yet this shadow war of faith and Norse identity would ultimately be overshadowed by the most famous clandestine struggle in Scottish history, a final, desperate bid to restore the Stuart kings to the throne that relied not on armies marching in formation, but on a silent, invisible web of trust and treachery that stretched from the glens of Scotland to the palaces of France. When Prince Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, landed on the west coast of Scotland in 1745, he did not arrive at the head of a vast invading force. He came with barely a handful of men, his hopes resting entirely on the promise of a secret support network that had been decades in the making. This was the Jacobite Underground, a sophisticated and perilous operation run by the Highland clans, whose efficiency and secrecy would make any modern intelligence agency proud. Their mission was monumental: to raise an army right under the nose of the British government, equip it, feed it, and maneuver it across the country, all while maintaining an almost perfect veil of silence. The first and most vital component of this system was its communication network. With government spies and patrols everywhere, sending an overt message was tantamount to suicide. Instead, the clans developed a relay system of trusted couriers known as Gillian Ruin or Secret Boys. These were not boys at all, but often hardened, fast-moving men who knew the mountain passes and hidden paths like the backs of their hands. A message from the prince's inner circle in the Great Glen would be passed to a MacDonald in Keppoch, who would then send a Jill Ruin on a frantic cross-country run to a Cameron in Lochaber, who would in turn dispatch another runner to the Kishomes in Strathglass. These men could cover staggering distances in a single night, their messages often committed to memory rather than paper to leave no physical evidence. If a written order was absolutely necessary, it was encoded in a simple but effective cipher, often using Gaelic words or place names that would be meaningless to any redcoat soldier who might intercept it. A phrase like "the heather is blooming in Bremer" could be a call to muster, while "the cattle are restless" might signal that government troops were on the move. But an army cannot fight with messages alone. It needs weapons, gunpowder, and provisions. This is where the second pillar of the underground came into play, the hidden cache. Years before the prince ever set foot on Scottish soil, sympathetic clan chiefs had begun preparing for this exact moment. In caves along the coast, in peat bogs away from prying eyes, and beneath the floors of seemingly abandoned shielings, they had stockpiled a secret arsenal. French and Spanish muskets smuggled ashore from small fishing boats under the cover of darkness were carefully greased, wrapped in oilcloth, and buried. Barrels of black powder were stored in dry, concealed caves, their locations known only to a select few within each clan. When the call to arms finally came, these hidden troves were unearthed, transforming bands of clansmen with hunting guns into regiments of soldiers armed with military-grade equipment. The provisioning was just as cleverly managed. Loyal families across the routes of the Jacobite army were secretly instructed to set aside portions of their grain harvest and to hide casks of salted meat. These supplies were not gathered in a central, vulnerable depot, but were scattered across hundreds of locations, creating a resilient logistical chain that could feed the advancing army without ever revealing its full strength or intention to the enemy. Perhaps the most audacious aspect of the operation was the system of plausible deniability it afforded the clan chiefs. Publicly, many of these chiefs were sworn subjects of King George II. They attended Parliament in London, paid their taxes, and professed loyalty to the crown. Privately, they were the architects of rebellion. They mastered the art of speaking out of both sides of their mouth. A chief might host a government officer for dinner, offering warm hospitality and assurances of his peaceful intentions, all while his younger brother was in the next glen overseeing the distribution of those very smuggled muskets to his clansmen. They used intermediaries and trusted kinsmen to conduct the riskiest operations, ensuring that if anything went wrong, they could truthfully deny any direct involvement. This delicate dance allowed them to maintain their positions and protect their lands until the very moment they were ready to publicly declare for the prince, a moment that, for some, never came, allowing them to survive the rebellion's collapse and protect their people from the government's wrath. This network was not confined to the Highlands. It was a truly international conspiracy. Coded letters written in invisible ink, often just lemon juice, flowed between Jacobite sympathizers in Edinburgh and Paris. Bankers in Amsterdam funneled money through complex transactions to purchase supplies. The entire operation was a testament to the deep and enduring loyalty the Stuart cause inspired, a loyalty that compelled men and women from all walks of life to risk everything in a breathtakingly dangerous game of cat and mouse. The success of the Jacobite underground was proven by the sheer speed and surprise of the rising itself. In a matter of weeks, Prince Charlie was at the head of an army that seemed to the government to have materialized out of the mist itself, a phantom force brought into being by whispers, hidden steel, and the unbreakable bonds of a secret society that, for a brief, glorious moment, very nearly changed the course of British history. But the sophisticated communication networks of the Jacobite cause would have been useless without the most fundamental currency of Highland power and survival: cattle. For centuries, long before kings and queens in distant capitals decided the fate of nations, the true, pulse-quickening conflict in the glens was fought over herds of horned, shaggy beasts. This was the world of the creech, the great cattle raid, a practice so deeply embedded in Gaelic culture that it was far more than simple theft. It was a refined form of economic warfare, a complex game of strategy and prestige governed by its own unwritten rules and celebrated in song and story. In a land where wealth was measured on the hoof, to successfully plunder a rival's cattle was to demonstrate superior strength, cunning, and honor, while to suffer a raid was a humiliation that could cripple a clan's economy for a generation. The strategic objective of a creech was never mindless destruction. It was a surgical strike aimed at the very heart of a clan's survival. Cattle were the foundational element of the Highland economy. They provided milk, cheese, and meat. Their hides were used for clothing and shelter, and their value could be traded for virtually anything else a community needed. A clan's status and its ability to feed its people, pay its dues, and support its fighting men were all directly tied to the size and health of its herds. Therefore, a successful large-scale raid was the equivalent of freezing a modern nation's bank accounts and seizing its industrial assets simultaneously. It could bankrupt a rival chieftain, forcing him into a position of weakness from which he might have to concede land, political influence, or even the loyalty of his own kinsmen, who would see his failure as a sign of divine disfavor. This was conflict with a clear, calculable goal: to inflict maximum economic damage while avoiding a costly pitched battle that would waste precious human lives. Executing such an operation required immense specialized knowledge and meticulous planning, transforming the raiders into masters of covert movement. The men chosen for a creech were not the entire clan army, but a select group of skilled individuals known as seasoned, agile fighters who knew the land like the back of their hand. Before any move was made, scouts would spend days or even weeks observing the target, learning the daily routines of the herdsmen, identifying the best hidden drove roads through the mountains, and pinpointing the exact location of the night enclosure or buell. The raid itself was a test of endurance and stealth. Moving under cover of darkness or thick mist, the party would travel vast distances on foot over some of Europe's most unforgiving terrain, often surviving on nothing but a pocket of oatmeal and water from mountain burns. The goal was to reach the target glen unseen, seize the cattle with breathtaking speed and efficiency, and immediately begin the frantic drive back to home territory, herding the panicked animals along pre-selected escape routes that offered natural cover. This is where the true artistry of the creech emerged, in the perilous journey home known as the driving of the prey. The raiders had to move a large, noisy, and unwilling group of animals across many miles of open moor and mountain pass, all while being pursued by an enraged and undoubtedly well-armed enemy. To succeed, they employed tactics of incredible cleverness. They would often tie rawhide thongs to the cattle's horns to keep them together in a tight, manageable mass. They knew to ford rivers at specific, little-known shallows to throw off pursuers, and would drive the herd over rocky ground to minimize the tracks left behind. Some stories even tell of raiders putting the cattle's hooves in woven straw baskets to muffle their sound and obscure their prints as they passed close to enemy settlements. The pursuit, or toir, was just as much a part of the ritual. The wronged clan was honor-bound to give chase, and if they could catch the raiders before they crossed the symbolic border into their own lands, a fierce skirmish was inevitable. This pursuit was as much about saving face and demonstrating resolve as it was about recovering the stolen property. Far from being seen as a crime, a successful creech was a source of immense cultural prestige, a story to be recounted around the fire for generations. The daring young men who excelled at this dangerous game were celebrated as heroes, their exploits immortalized in walking songs and poetry. A chief who could not protect his cattle was considered weak, while one who could skillfully orchestrate raids on his enemies was seen as a strong and provident leader, capable of increasing his clan's wealth and status. This created a fascinating and sustainable, if violent, economic ecosystem. Cattle constantly circulated between clans, almost like a brutal form of currency exchange. clan might be raided one season only to mount a successful counter-raid the next, restoring its fortunes and its honor. It was a system that required a delicate balance of power. A raid was a challenge, a test of a rival's strength, but to wipe a clan out completely was to destroy a neighboring buffer state and a potential future ally against a common enemy. The Creech was therefore the engine of a unique form of politics where wealth, honor, and power were constantly negotiated not with treaties, but with the secret, nighttime movement of cattle through the silent, watchful hills. But this constant, fluid movement of cattle was not the only way clans communicated their power and navigated their complex world of alliances and enmities. In a society where literacy was rare and trust was scarce, they developed a sophisticated, silent language of symbols, a visual code woven into their very clothing and carved into their shields that could declare loyalty, issue a challenge, or send a covert signal across a crowded room or a misty battlefield. This was the hidden world of heraldry and tartan, where every color, pattern, and creature was a loaded message, understood by allies and adversaries alike. The most famous of these symbols is, of course, the tartan. Today, we see it as a uniform of family identity, but in the medieval period, its function was far more practical and immediate. Specific set patterns, the arrangement of colored stripes, acted as a crucial form of identification in the chaos of battle. Before a charge, a commander could quickly scan the field and distinguish his Macintosh allies from the MacDonald line by the dominant hues and sequence of their plaids. This was vital for coordination, preventing fatal cases of mistaken identity when clans fought side by side. But the use of tartan went beyond the battlefield. Wearing a particular pattern could be a bold political statement. After the Jacobite Rising of 1745, when the British government enacted the Dress Act to ban tartan in an attempt to break Highland culture, wearing it became an act of silent rebellion. A man wearing a hidden swatch of his forbidden tartan was making a profound declaration of loyalty to his clan and his exiled prince, a secret badge of honor known only to those who shared his cause. The dyes themselves, derived from local plants and lichens, could even signal a clansman's origin to the trained eye: the deep brown from crotal moss found in one glen, the specific green from bracken in another. Beyond the woven cloth, the animal crests that clans adopted were never chosen at random. They were a powerful shorthand for the attributes the clan valued most and wanted to project to the world. These crests were worn on bonnets and displayed on shields, serving as a constant reminder of a clan's identity and reputation. The fierce wildcat of Clan Chattan wasn't just a stylized picture, it was a promise. In heraldic language, the wildcat was renowned for fiercely defending its young and refusing to surrender even in a hopeless fight. A perfect symbol for a confederation of clans known for their tenacity and unity in the face of adversity. Similarly, the salmon that leaps on the crest of Clan Drummond speaks to wisdom and perseverance, the salmon being a creature of ancient knowledge in Celtic lore that swims against the current to reach its goal. A boar's head, like that of the Campbells, symbolized a warrior's ferocity and resilience in battle. To see these symbols advancing toward you was to receive a clear, non-verbal message about the nature of your opponent before a single sword was even drawn. The most complex and encrypted of all these visual tools, however, was the full coat of arms. Governed by the strict, formal rules of heraldry, a clan chief's armorial achievement was a dense document encrypted in color and symbol, readable to anyone educated in its language. The shield at its center was the core of the message. The colors or tinctures held meaning: red for martial fortitude, blue for truth and loyalty, green for hope and joy. The charges, the images placed upon the shield, told the clan's story. A galley ship like that of the MacDonalds or MacLeods proudly proclaimed their Norse Gaelic heritage and their dominion over the seas. A chevron or a bend, simple geometric shapes, could indicate protection or a willingness to serve as a defender. Perhaps the most telling part of the coat of arms for decoding secret alliances and rivalries was the surrounding elements. If a chief married the daughter of another powerful lord, her family's symbols might be incorporated into his own arms in a section called an escutcheon of pretense, publicly advertising this new, powerful alliance for all to see. Supporters, the figures that flanked the shield, were often chosen to reflect political allegiances. Displaying a lion or a unicorn, the supporters of the British royal arms, was a clear declaration of loyalty to the crown after the union of the kingdoms. Conversely, using more localized Highland symbols could be a subtler nod to older, independent loyalties. Even the motto, written on a scroll below, was a direct message, often a war cry or a phrase encapsulating the clan's core philosophy. To the uninitiated, a coat of arms was just a beautiful, complex picture. But to a rival chief or a potential ally scanning it in a great hall, it was a rich source of intelligence, a public resume of a clan's history, its connections, its strengths, and its intentions, all communicated without a single word ever being spoken. While the grand narratives of history often focus on the clans who fought glorious last stands or suffered dramatic downfalls, there exists an even quieter, more enigmatic form of disappearance, one not marked by a final, fiery battle, but by a slow, deliberate fading from view. This is the mystery of clans like the MacQuarries of Ulva, a family whose power and influence did not end with a clash of steel, but with a series of silent, calculated decisions made in the face of an irreversible shift in the world around them. Their story is the ultimate secret war, not for dominance, but for simple survival in an era that no longer had a place for them. By the early 17th century, the old rules were changing. The authority of the Scottish crown was becoming absolute, and the chaotic, fluid power dynamics that had allowed smaller, independent clans to thrive by playing larger neighbors against each other were rapidly solidifying into a rigid hierarchy dominated by a few mega-clans like the Campbells and the MacDonalds. For a clan like the MacQuarrie, whose strength lay in their island fortress of Ulva and their prowess as seafarers and warriors, this new world order presented an impossible choice: resist and be crushed, or surrender and vanish. They chose the latter, and their method was a masterclass in strategic dissolution. The first and most powerful weapon in their arsenal was not the sword, but the marriage alliance. The MacQuarrie chiefs began to systematically marry their sons and daughters into the very families that posed the greatest threat to their autonomy, most notably the powerful MacLeods of Duat. On the surface, this looked like a strengthening of bonds, a traditional Gaelic practice of building kinship networks, but in reality, it was a calculated survival strategy. Each marriage slowly diluted the pure MacQuarrie line, and more importantly, began to tether their fortunes irrevocably to a more powerful patron. Land, the very source of a clan's identity and wealth, started to shift hands not through conquest but through dowries and inheritance agreements. A parcel of MacQuarrie land given to a MacLeod daughter as her totcher or dowry was land that was never coming back. Over generations, these seemingly minor transactions whittled away at their territory, gradually transforming the MacQuarries from independent landholders into respected, but ultimately subordinate, taxmen on what had once been their own ancestral soil. The final, definitive act was not a surrender in battle, but a signature on a deed. In the late 17th century, Lachlan MacQuarrie, the 16th and final chief of his line, made the conscious decision to sell the entire island of Ulva to a Campbell landlord. This was not an act of desperation from a bankrupt chieftain, but a clear-eyed recognition that the old way of life was over. The economic pressures were immense. The clan could no longer sustain itself through the old systems of cattle and kinship. The political risks of holding out were even greater, as holding a small, valuable island would inevitably make them a target for a powerful neighbor looking to expand. By selling, Lachlan MacQuarrie secured financial stability for his family and, in a way, protection for his remaining clansmen, who would now be tenants of the mighty Campbells rather than targets for elimination. He then did what many fading chiefs did. He took a commission in the British Army, literally enlisting in the very institution that had been designed to pacify the Highlands his ancestors had once ruled. The chief was gone, absorbed into the machinery of the state he could not beat. And so the clan MacQuarrie did not die. It dispersed, without a chief to lead them and without land to bind them together. The people who bore the name faced a stark set of choices. Some, following their chief's example, joined the British military, their fighting spirit finding a new outlet in regiments fighting in North America and India. Others emigrated, seeking new beginnings in the colonies, their MacQuarrie name becoming MacDonald or Campbell on passenger manifests to avoid the prejudice that followed Highlanders in the aftermath of the Jacobite rebellions. Many simply remained on Ulva and the surrounding lands as tenants, but their identity began to blur. Over time, they might intermarry with Campbell tenants, their children might adopt the more common and protective surname, and the specific stories and traditions of the MacQuarries would slowly be subsumed into the larger narrative of the region. The culture survived in fragments, a passed-down song, a family story about origins on a beautiful island, a peculiar tartan pattern stored in a trunk. But the political entity of the clan was gone, its sovereignty willingly surrendered to the relentless tide of history. The story of the MacQuarries is a poignant reminder that not all endings are loud. Their secret war was one of assimilation and adaptation, a conscious decision to choose a gradual fading over a violent extinction. They leave behind a haunting question for anyone tracing Scottish ancestry or studying clan history. How many other families met a similar fate? How many clans simply melted away, their members blending into larger families, their names anglicized beyond recognition, their existence now only a faint echo in a parish register or a half-remembered story? Their disappearance challenges our romantic notions of clan history, proving that sometimes the most profound defeat is not found on a battlefield, but in the quiet, heart-wrenching decision to lay down an ancient identity so that your people might simply live on, even if they must do so under another name. But the calculated erasure of a clan like the MacQuarries represents just one form of disappearance, a quiet, almost diplomatic fading. For a truly explosive and defiant existence outside the law, we must turn our gaze from the isolated islands and glens to the violent, contested strip of land that divided two warring kingdoms. Here, in the blood-soaked valleys along the Scottish-English border, a different kind of clan thrived, one that answered to no king and lived by a code of its own making. These were the border reivers, families like the Armstrongs, the Elliots, the Grahams, and the Nixons, for whom systematic raiding was not an act of rebellion but a way of life, a brutal and ingenious form of economic survival that turned the very concept of nationality on its head. This culture of reiving, from the old word reive meaning to plunder, was born from a unique set of circumstances. For centuries, the borderlands were the primary battlefield for the endless wars between Scotland and England. Armies would march through, burning crops, slaughtering livestock, and devastating the land. For the families who lived there, loyalty to a distant crown in Edinburgh or London meant little when the armies of that same crown could destroy your livelihood in an afternoon. The central governments of both kingdoms viewed the borders as a buffer zone, a sacrificable wasteland. In response, the borderers developed a fierce, localized identity. Their primary allegiance was not to Scotland or England, but to their surname and their ride, a close-knit group of kinsmen and allies who could be counted on in a crisis. The land itself, scarred by constant warfare, could not support a peaceful agrarian society. So they built an economy on movement, on the swift and efficient redistribution of wealth, specifically cattle, sheep, and anything else not nailed down. The reivers' expertise was in lightning-fast cross-border raids, operating in small, mobile bands on nimble horses known as hobbies. They could strike deep into enemy territory under cover of darkness or bad weather. Their target was always movable wealth. A successful raid into England by the Scottish Armstrongs might net them hundreds of head of cattle from the English Fenwicks, which they would then drive back through the treacherous passes of the Cheviot Hills to their fortified tower houses in Liddesdale, a valley so notoriously lawless it was known as the cockpit of the borders. These towers, or peel towers, were not castles for nobility but practical, defensive homes for farming raiding families. They were thick-walled, with a ground floor byre for animals and living quarters reached by a ladder that could be pulled up, turning each home into a tiny, impregnable fortress against the retaliatory raid that was sure to come. This cycle of raid and counter-raid was formalized into a complex system known as the deadly feud. If a member of the Elliot family was killed by a Scott clansman, the entire Elliot surname was honor-bound to seek vengeance, not necessarily by killing the specific murderer, but by targeting any member of the Scott family. This could trigger a chain reaction of violence lasting for generations. It was a form of justice completely separate from the royal courts of either kingdom, a primitive form of insurance that ensured every death had a cost. The governments in London and Edinburgh tried to control this lawlessness by establishing a system of march laws and appointing wardens of the march from powerful local families. These wardens were supposed to hold special courts called truce days to settle disputes between the border clans. In reality, the wardens often participated in the reiving themselves, and truce days could quickly descend into chaotic brawls as tempers flared over stolen goods and old grudges. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of reiver culture was its utter disregard for national loyalty. A Scottish Graham might easily form a compact with an English Story to raid another Scottish clan, finding more in common with his fellow borderer across the national line than with a Highlander from Inverness Shire. This fluid identity was perfectly captured in their famous boast that they owed allegiance to neither country, but only to their own surname and ultimately to themselves and God. Their resistance was not ideological, it was practical. They were resisting the impoverishment that came from being a perpetual battlefield by creating a shadow economy that operated with ruthless efficiency. They became so adept that their services were even hired out as mercenaries, with both Scottish and English armies employing reivers as light cavalry, valuing their intimate knowledge of the terrain and their ferocity in combat. The end of the reivers came not from military defeat, but from the political unification of the two crowns. When James VI of Scotland also became James I of England in 1603, he turned his attention to pacifying the lawless land that had separated his two kingdoms. He launched a brutal campaign known as the Pacification of the Borders, employing hangings, deportations, and the burning of homes and fields with a severity that shocked even the hardened reivers. Families were forcibly relocated to Ireland or to the colonies, and the power of the great riding surnames was systematically broken, yet the reiver spirit never truly died. It simply dispersed, its legacy living on in the ballads of betrayal and heroism, in the stubborn independence of the border people, and in the DNA of millions around the world whose ancestors carried those names: Armstrong, Elliot, Scott, Kerr, Bell, and with them the untamable, rebellious spirit of those who lived between two kingdoms, answering to no law but their own. Yet for all the complex symbolism woven into tartans and carved onto shields, the most powerful and perilous negotiations in the clan world were conducted not with visual signals, but with a spoken vow across a matrimonial altar. In the high-stakes game of Highland politics, a chief's most valuable assets were not his cattle or his castles, but his children. The marriage alliance was far more than a social event or a personal union. It was the ultimate instrument of secret diplomacy, a sophisticated and coldly calculated tool for reshaping the political landscape without ever drawing a sword. A well-planned wedding could secure a border, bankrupt a rival, or plant a loyal agent within an enemy's inner circle, making the marriage contract as strategically vital as any military treaty. The most straightforward use of this tool was the offensive alliance, designed to isolate and encircle a common enemy. two chiefs, perhaps the Mackenzies and the MacLeods, might find themselves both threatened by the expanding power of the MacDonalds. Instead of risking their own warriors in open conflict, they would negotiate a marriage between, say, the Mackenzie chief's daughter and the MacLeod chief's eldest son. This union created a binding obligation of mutual defense, a promise that if the MacDonalds attacked one, the other would come to their aid. The wedding itself was a public declaration of this new power block, a message sent not with a herald but with a feast, telling the MacDonald chief that he now faced a united front. The real genius, however, lay in the private agreements sealed with a handshake away from the celebrations. These secret clauses might include detailed plans for coordinated cattle raids on MacDonald lands or an agreement to share intelligence gathered from their respective spies. A daughter married into an allied clan became more than a wife. She was a permanent ambassador, a trusted channel for communication, and a living symbol of the pact that could not be easily broken. But the darker, more insidious application of marital diplomacy was the defensive gambit, or the Trojan horse marriage. A powerful clan like the Campbells, masters of political strategy, might offer a marriage to a weaker neighboring clan like the MacIvors, not out of genuine friendship, but as a prelude to absorption. The offer itself was a trap. To refuse would be a deadly insult, giving the Campbells a pretext for invasion. To accept meant welcoming the fox into the henhouse. The Campbell daughter who married the MacIvor chief would arrive with a lavish dowry of land or gold, but she would also be accompanied by a retinue of Campbell advisors, scribes, and guards loyal to her father, not her husband. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Campbell influence would seep into the MacIvor court. The chief might find himself increasingly reliant on his Campbell wife's counsel and her father's wealth, gradually signing over management of his estates or legal authority to his new in-laws. Within a generation, the MacIvors might find themselves ruling in name only, their clan's independence quietly dismantled from within by the very alliance that was supposed to protect it. The most perilous game of all was the double alliance, a strategy of breathtaking audacity that only the most confident or desperate chiefs would attempt. This involved marrying children into two rival clans simultaneously. A cunning chief might marry his eldest son to a daughter of Clan Gordon to secure an alliance in the north, while marrying his own daughter to a son of Clan Fraser, the Gordons' historic rivals to the south. This placed the chief in a position of incredible influence, acting as a crucial pivot between two powerful enemies. He could play the two sides against each other, trading secrets gleaned from one household to gain favor with the other. The risk, of course, was catastrophic. If either clan discovered the double game, the chief would earn the permanent enmity of both, making his clan a target for annihilation. The potential reward, however, was a fragile but highly profitable peace, where both rivals sought his favor with gifts and concessions, allowing his own clan to thrive in the safety of the middle ground. These marriages were a high-wire act of deception, where a family loyalty was forever divided, and a single misspoken word at a family gathering could lead to ruin. Inevitably, this system built on cold calculation rather than affection produced its share of tragedies and explosive betrayals. A young man or woman raised from childhood to understand they were a pawn in their father's game might eventually rebel, their personal desires clashing with political necessity. There are stories of brides secretly warning their birth clan of an impending raid planned by their new husband's family, or of grooms refusing to honor martial obligations to their in-laws out of personal hatred. The greatest betrayal of all, however, was the broken marriage pact. If a chief reneged on the promised terms of a dowry or failed to provide the military support he had secretly pledged, the insult was far more profound than a broken business deal. It was a violation of kinship, an unforgivable act of treachery that could ignite a feud more bitter and lasting than any battlefield defeat. In the end, the silent diplomacy of the marriage alliance proved that in the secret wars of the clans, a carefully spoken vow could be far more destructive. and far more revealing of true ambition than any battle cry shouted on the wind. Yet the silent diplomacy of marriage alliances and the treacherous politics of the borderlands all required a stage, a place where these games of power could be played out in relative safety. This brings us to the most tangible symbols of clan dominance and ingenuity, their formidable strongholds. To the untrained eye, a castle like Dunvegan or Eilean appears as a straightforward fortress, a statement of military power in stone. But look closer and you begin to see a different story, one of psychological warfare, clever deception, and architectural features meticulously designed not for set-piece medieval battles, but for the specific, shadowy realities of clan conflict. These structures were not just homes for chiefs, they were the nerve centers of secret wars, engineered to outwit, outlast, and intimidate rivals through a language of stone and strategic placement. Consider first the location. A clan's choice of where to build was its first and most crucial defensive decision. Unlike the grand castles of the lowlands or England, which were often positioned to control wide plains or major rivers, many Highland strongholds embraced a different philosophy: inaccessibility. Castle Stalker in Argyll, for instance, isn't on a hill overlooking a town. It's on a small, tidal island in the middle of a sea loch. To approach it unseen is nearly impossible, and any attacking force would be utterly exposed during a slow, wet landing. Similarly, the ancient seat of the MacLeods, Dunvegan Castle, is built upon a rock jutting into a sea loch connected to the mainland by a narrow, easily defended causeway. This wasn't about projecting power over a vast area. It was about creating a defensible node, a place where a chief and his most valuable followers could retreat, hold out, and control the immediate sea lanes. The message to rivals was clear: you may own the land, but the sea and the rock are mine. This maritime focus allowed clans like the MacLeods and MacDonalds to remain semi-independent for centuries, as their power base was literally separate from the mainland-dominated authority of the Scottish crown. Once you approach these structures, their defensive cunning becomes even more apparent. The classic L-plan tower house, the workhorse of clan architecture, is a masterpiece of defensive design for a guerrilla war. The tall, square tower provided a commanding view of the surrounding glen or loch, but its genius lay in the smaller wing that jutted out at a right angle. This created a dead zone at the base of the main wall, a blind spot where attackers could not be seen or fired upon from the main arrow slits. However, this same wing was peppered with small, downward-angled openings known as dumb holes or murder holes. From these, defenders could drop rocks, pour boiling water or pitch, or fire directly down on anyone attempting to batter down the door or scale the walls in that vulnerable spot. The main entrance itself was a death trap, often protected by a massive iron gate forged from interlocking bars that was stronger than wood and more flexible than a portcullis. Even if an enemy got through the outer door, they would find themselves in a narrow, dark passageway, trapped between the yett and a second, heavy inner door, while defenders above rained death through more murder holes in the ceiling. But the true heart of a clan's stronghold's secret power lay in its hidden interior features, designed for survival, escape, and intelligence. Secret passages were not the stuff of romance but a practical necessity. At Corgarth Castle in Aberdeenshire, a tiny, concealed stairway allowed defenders to move between floors without being seen from the main spiral staircase, enabling them to surprise attackers who had breached the ground level. At Muchal's Castle in the northeast, a network of hidden chambers and passages within the walls allowed the occupants to listen in on conversations in the Great Hall below, a perfect tool for rooting out spies or discovering plots among seemingly loyal guests. Perhaps the most chilling feature was the Laird's Lug, or Lord's Ear, a small, discreet listening pipe built into the stonework of a fireplace in the Great Hall, which would channel sound up to the Lord's private chambers above. A chief could literally eavesdrop on his own clan members and visitors as they talked freely below, believing themselves unobserved. This architectural surveillance was the ultimate tool for a leader navigating a world where loyalty was fluid and betrayal was a constant threat. These fortresses were also designed for a swift and silent exit. Many castles, like the MacLeod stronghold of Duat on Mull, had small, low doors hidden on the seaward side, facing away from the land approach. In times of siege, the chief and his family could slip out of this postern gate under cover of darkness to a waiting boat, escaping a hopeless fight to regroup and rally allies elsewhere. This was not seen as cowardice, but as smart strategy. Preserving the leadership was more important than a glorious last stand. Inside, hidden rooms and concealed closets were common, used to hide everything from precious charters and treaties to stores of black powder or even a person. During the government's relentless hunt for the MacGregors, many a clansman owed his life to a false back in a pantry or a storage space concealed behind a tapestry, where he could remain hidden for days while redcoat soldiers searched the castle above. Ultimately, the architecture of clan strongholds reveals a mindset vastly different from that of European feudal lords. These were not castles built to withstand a prolonged cannon siege by a national army. They were designed for the sudden, brutal raid, the surprise attack by a rival clan, and the need for intelligence and escape. Every curved wall, every hidden stair, every strategically placed murder hole spoke to a reality where danger could emerge from the mist at any moment, where your neighbor could be your enemy, and where survival depended not just on strength, but on cunning, secrecy, and an intimate knowledge of the stone walls you called home. They are the silent, enduring testament to a world where the most important battles were often won not by the largest army, but by the best-designed defenses. While the clash of steel and the flash of tartan capture our imagination, some of the most decisive battles in the clan wars were fought with a far quieter weapon: economic dominance. Beyond the raid and the feud lay a sophisticated, shadowy struggle for control of the very resources that fueled life in the Highlands. This was a conflict waged not over honor or glory, but over survival itself, where the careful manipulation of a trade route or the secret sabotage of a fishing boat could cripple a rival clan more effectively than any army. The true masters of this form of warfare understood that wealth was the engine of power, and they fought with ruthless ingenuity to control its flow. Control of the sea lanes was the ultimate prize. For the maritime clans of the West, their burlens were not just weapons of war, but the vital arteries of commerce. The MacLeods of Skye and the MacDonalds of Islay engaged in a constant, silent struggle over the rich fishing grounds around the Isle of Lewis and the Hebrides. These waters were a liquid gold mine, teeming with herring and cod that could be salted, packed, and sold to markets across Europe. A clan that dominated these grounds could finance the building of new castles, the hiring of more men, and the forging of stronger alliances. The methods of this economic war were subtle but devastating. A rival's fishing nets might be found mysteriously slashed in the night, their buoys cut loose, or their seasonal fishing camps on remote islands burned to the ground. These were not acts of mindless vandalism, but calculated strikes designed to create food shortages and financial instability, weakening a rival from within long before any formal declaration of hostility was ever made. On land, the most contested assets were the ancient drove roads, the lifelines of the Highland economy. Every autumn, thousands of black cattle were gathered from glens across the Highlands to be walked south to the great trysts or markets in the lowlands, where they would be sold to English buyers. The clan that controlled a key stretch of these routes held immense power. They could levy tolls on rival clans for the privilege of passage, a form of legalized extortion that could drain a competitor's coffers. More ruthlessly, they could simply deny access, blocking a clan's only path to market and trapping their wealth on the hoof. This forced the isolated clan to sell their cattle at a steep discount to their tormentor, who could then drive the beast south and reap the profits himself. The Campbells, with their strategic grip on the passes from Argyll into the lowlands, became masters of this game, using their geographic advantage to economically strangle their western neighbors while enriching themselves. The battle for resources extended deep into the forest and beneath the very hills. Stands of ancient oak and pine were not just scenery, they were a strategic resource crucial for building ships, fortifications, and homes. A clandestine agreement between a clan chief and a lowland timber merchant could see a rival's woodlands systematically and secretly clear-cut, leaving them without the materials to repair their fishing fleet or rebuild a burned tower. Similarly, rights to mine lead, used for shot, or slate, used for roofing, were fiercely guarded. Sabotaging a mine was a classic tactic. A disguised party might collapse the entrance to a rival's mine shaft or divert a stream to flood it, causing months of costly delays and crippling their ability to produce vital goods. This kind of sabotage was incredibly difficult to prove and even harder to retaliate against, making it the perfect weapon for a cold economic war. Perhaps the most ingenious tool in this hidden conflict was the manipulation of credit and debt through sympathetic merchants. A chief facing a cash shortfall might take a loan from a merchant in a nearby burg, using his lands as collateral. A rival clan, discovering this arrangement, could secretly buy that debt from the merchant. They now held the legal leverage to foreclose on the land, annexing territory without a single casualty. Alternatively, they could pressure the merchant to suddenly call in the loan, forcing the chief into a desperate financial crisis that might compel him to cede political influence or sign an unfavorable treaty. These dealings were conducted in the back rooms of inns and trading posts far from the battlefield, but their consequences could reshape the map of clan power as definitively as any victory in the field. This quiet, relentless economic warfare proves that the history of the clans is not just a tale of brave charges and heroic last stands, but also a story of brilliant, ruthless strategy where the most powerful blow was often the one that emptied an enemy's purse instead of shedding his blood. But in a culture where reputation was everything, a carefully aimed poem could be as destructive as a volley of musket fire. While chieftains built fortresses of stone, they also cultivated a far more subtle and potent weapon, the secret army of bards and storytellers who served as masters of psychological warfare. In the Highlands, the poet was not merely an entertainer, he was a feared political operative, a keeper of hidden histories, and a strategic asset whose words could build a legacy or burn a reputation to the ground. These men, often holding the honored position of Cinchade or Bard, were woven into the very fabric of clan leadership, and their power resided in the Gaelic world's profound reverence for the spoken word. A chief's strength was measured not only by the number of swords he could muster, but by the quality of the poet who sang his praises. The reverse was also true. To lack a poet was to be invisible, to have one's deeds and lineage lost to silence, which was a form of social death. The most feared weapon in their arsenal was satire. A skilled bard could compose a ron, a mocking, cutting poem designed to publicly humiliate a rival chieftain. This was no simple insult, it was a complex and devastating art form. The satire would target a chief's greatest insecurities or most public failures, his cowardice in a recent skirmish, his inability to provide for his people during a famine, a humiliating defeat in a cattle raid, or even a personal flaw like miserliness or incompetence. Composed in intricate Gaelic meter and packed with clever puns and allusions, these poems were designed to be memorized and repeated. They would spread like wildfire from township to township, sung at gatherings and whispered around fires. In a society built on honor, this public ridicule could be catastrophic. It could demoralize a chieftain's followers, making them question his fitness to lead. It could dissuade other clans from forming alliances with him, branding him as weak or foolish. A truly effective satire could literally paralyze a leader with shame, destroying his authority without a single life being lost. The power was so potent that it was believed a perfect satire could raise blisters on the face of its target, a physical manifestation of the spiritual poison of shame. Yet these cultural custodians were also archivists of the secret history, the true record of events that official chronicles, often written by the victors or by distant monks, would never tell. While the crown's historians might record a battle as a simple victory for one side, the clan's poet would preserve the hidden story, the betrayal that turned the tide, the individual act of bravery that went unseen, the personal tragedies of the families involved. They encoded these truths in dense, elusive verse, full of place names and personal epithets that were meaningless to outsiders, but formed a detailed map of the conflict for those within the culture. This oral archive ensured that a clan's version of events, its grievances and its justifications, would be passed down through generations, keeping the memory of a wrong alive long after the participants were dust. This was crucial for maintaining long-term feuds. A new chief would be raised on the songs of how his grandfather was wronged, the bitterness preserved in verse as fresh as the day it was composed, ensuring the conflict would not be forgotten or forgiven. During times of open conflict, the bard's role shifted to that of a propaganda minister and morale officer. Before a battle, he would recite the genealogy of the chief, linking him to a glorious line of legendary warriors, thus reminding the clansmen of who they were fighting for and the weight of history upon their shoulders. He would compose stirring incitements to battle, celebrating the strength of the clan and mocking the enemy, his words literally designed to stir the blood and suppress fear. In the aftermath, whether in victory or defeat, his poetry would frame the narrative. A victory would be magnified into an epic tale of heroism. A tactical retreat could be spun as a brave holding action against impossible odds. This control over the story was vital for maintaining clan cohesion and prestige in the wider Highland world. Even in defeat, a powerful poetic narrative could salvage honor and lay the groundwork for a future return to power, proving that the true battle was often not for the field itself, but for the story that would be told about it long after the fighting was done. But beyond the economic warfare of markets and mines lies a legend that has captivated treasure hunters and historians for centuries. The whispered promise of vast clan treasures, hidden away in times of peril and never recovered. These are not the romantic fictions of storybooks, but legends born from the harsh realities of clan life, where the sudden arrival of a government army or a rival war band could force a chief to make a desperate decision, to bury his wealth and hope to reclaim it when the danger passed. For many, that peaceful day never came, leaving behind a landscape seeded with cryptic clues and tantalizing mysteries. The most famous of these legends swirls around the lords of the Isles themselves. At the height of their power, their treasury at Finlagan on Islay was said to rival that of the Scottish crown, filled with gold from their continental trade, silver from their control of the sea lanes, and priceless religious relics. When the lordship was finally forfeited to the crown in 1493, the story goes that the last adherents of the MacDonald chiefs could not bear to see their wealth fall into enemy hands. Under cover of darkness, they supposedly loaded the most valuable items onto a galley and rowed it to a secret location, perhaps a sea cave along the rugged coast or a small, isolated island where they buried it deep. The men who knew the location allegedly took the secret to their graves, creating a vacuum filled by generations of speculation and fruitless searches. The Jacobite uprisings created a second great wave of hidden hoards. After the catastrophic defeat at Culloden in 1746, the victorious government forces embarked on a systematic campaign to dismantle Highland culture, which included seizing the assets of any clan suspected of supporting the Stuart cause. For the chiefs and tacksmen who had backed Bonnie Prince Charlie, this meant the imminent loss of everything: their land, their homes, and their family wealth accumulated over generations. Faced with this, many chose to hide what they could. This wasn't just about gold coins, it was about preserving a way of life. Caches were said to contain silver clan chalices used for toasts and ceremonies, sets of fine bagpipes, ceremonial weaponry inlaid with silver, and important family documents like land charters. These items held little monetary value for the government redcoats but were the very soul of the clan. They were buried in places known only to a trusted few, beneath the hearthstone of a burned cottage, at the foot of a distinctive tree in a remote glen, or at a specific point in a peat bog where the landmarks were clear only to those who had lived there their entire lives. So why, after centuries of searching with increasingly sophisticated technology, have these treasures remained so stubbornly hidden? The first and most significant reason is the utter devastation of the clan society that created them. The families who hid these caches were often killed in the ensuing conflicts, scattered into exile, or silenced by fear. The knowledge was an oral tradition, passed from father to son or chief to bard. When that chain was broken by death or forced emigration, the precise location died with the last person who knew it. The second reason is the radical transformation of the Scottish landscape itself. The very landmarks used to mark a hiding place have often vanished over the centuries. A distinctive trio of rocks might have been cleared for farming. A specific old oak tree used as a bearing point would have died and rotted away. Peat bogs have been drained, coastlines have eroded, and entire hillsides have been forested, rendering centuries-old directions utterly useless. An instruction to walk 20 paces from the weeping stone is meaningless when the stone has been moved or buried. Furthermore, the nature of the treasures themselves works against discovery. Unlike in fiction, these were not chests of glittering gold coins. Iron and silver would corrode over time, especially in the damp Scottish soil. A leather pouch containing silver coins might, over 250 years, simply turn into a shapeless crust of metal and rot, easily mistaken for a natural rock formation by anyone scanning the ground with a metal detector. A buried weapon would be a lump of rust. Without a clear, concentrated signal, these objects could lie inches below the surface, forever overlooked. The final, most poignant reason these hoards remain lost is that, for many, the search ended. For the exiled Highlanders in North America or Australia, the memory of a hidden treasure back in the glen became a family story, a sad legend of a lost world. Returning to search for it was impossible. The treasure's true value wasn't in its monetary worth but in what it represented: a home, a status, and an identity that was gone forever. To go back and dig it up would have been to confront a ghost, so the hoards remain not as mere buried loot, but as the last silent witnesses to a shattered world, waiting for a chance alignment of luck, technology, and historical insight to finally give up their secrets. While the grand strategies and secret alliances set the stage for conflict, the final, brutal arbiter of these hidden wars was often a uniquely crafted piece of steel, wielded with techniques perfected for the specific demands of the Highland landscape. This was not the warfare of massed pike formations or orderly cavalry charges seen on European battlefields. It was a close-quarters, shockingly personal form of combat that required specialized tools and a ferocious mindset. At the heart of this arsenal was the iconic Scottish basket-hilted broadsword, a weapon that is often mistakenly called a claymore. The true claymore, or claid him mór in Gaelic, was a massive, two-handed sword used in earlier centuries. The weapon that became synonymous with the clan warrior of the 17th and 18th centuries was its agile, one-handed descendant. Its most defining feature was the intricate cage of iron bars that protected the hand. This was not merely for decoration, it was a brilliant response to the realities of Highland combat. Opponents, knowing the devastating power of a Highland charge, would often target the swordsman's hands to disable him. The basket hilt made this nearly impossible, allowing a fighter to parry and block without fear of losing fingers, and it could even be used to punch an opponent in close quarters. The blade itself was designed for slashing and cutting, perfect for the sweeping, powerful strokes that could disable or kill with a single blow. But no clansman would ever go into battle with just his sword. His true constant companion was the S-giant dub, the small knife worn tucked into the top of the hose. Its name translates to black knife, likely referring to the darkened handle that would not give away its wearer's position in the dark. While often seen today as a ceremonial item, the S-Giant dub was a weapon of last resort and everyday utility. In a grapple or after losing his primary weapon, a Highlander could draw it in an instant for a lethal stab. More subtly, it was a powerful social symbol. To be invited into a man's home and to see him place his S-Giant dub openly on the table was a sign of trust, indicating he had no need of a hidden weapon among friends. For the close quarters mayhem of a clan skirmish, many warriors also carried the dirk, a long, heavy thrusting dagger. This was not a tool for throwing, it was a brutal instrument for finding gaps in an enemy's guard or armor. Often used in the left hand while the broadsword was in the right, the dirk was the cornerstone of the Highland dueling style, capable of blocking, hooking an opponent's arm, and delivering a fatal counter thrust in the same fluid motion. Perhaps the most famous and fearsome symbol of Highland arms is the Lochaber axe. This was not a weapon for the common soldier, but a tool of the clan guards and elite fighters. Imagine a long, heavy axe blade mounted on a 6-foot pole, often featuring a hook or spike on the reverse side. Its uses were devastatingly practical. The axe could cleave through shields and limbs with terrible force. The hook was used to drag cavalrymen from their saddles or to pull enemy combatants off their feet, breaking formations and creating chaos. In the hands of a strong man, it was a can opener for breaking into fortified positions or a tool for hacking through the wooden doors of a tower house. Its very appearance was meant to intimidate, projecting raw, unstoppable power. Yet for all the innovation in their blades, the true genius of Highland warfare lay in its tactics, which were perfectly adapted to the environment. The most famous of these was the Highland charge. This was not a mindless rush across a field. It was a carefully orchestrated shock tactic designed to break an enemy line in minutes. Clansmen would advance under cover of any available terrain, using folds in the ground and patches of mist to conceal their movement until they were frighteningly close, often within pistol shot or even musket range. Then, on a signal, they would let out a blood-curdling scream and charge at a full sprint, covering the last 50 yards in seconds. The goal was to smash into the enemy line before they could reload their muskets after their first, often panicked volley. The initial impact was delivered by a hail of thrown rocks from slings, a surprisingly effective and often overlooked weapon that could stun or injure men just before the lines met. Then came the swords and axes. The psychological effect was as important as the physical one. The sight and sound of hundreds of screaming, kilted warriors appearing from the mist and closing the distance with inhuman speed was often enough to make a disciplined line crumble before a single blow was struck. Beyond the charge, clans mastered the art of the ambush, using the land itself as a weapon. They would lure pursuing forces into narrow passes where their numbers meant nothing, where the terrain funneled them into a killing zone where a few dozen clansmen could hold off an army. They were experts at moving swiftly and silently through the heather and across rocky ground, using their natural camouflage to get within striking distance undetected. They fought a war of sudden, violent contact followed by a rapid disappearance back into the landscape, a style of conflict that government troops, trained for open field warfare, found utterly baffling and deeply terrifying. This combination of specialized steel and terrain-savvy tactics made the Highland warrior one of the most effective and feared irregular fighters in Europe, a testament to how innovation, when born from necessity, can forge a form of warfare as unique and formidable as the land that shaped it. Yet for all the celebrated ferocity of the Highland charge and the cunning of its warriors, some of the most successful campaigns in the secret wars were orchestrated not from the battlefield, but from the hearth and the garden by figures history often relegated to the background, the women of the clans. To imagine them solely as passive victims of the violence that surrounded them is to miss a crucial layer of the story. In a society where men could be killed, imprisoned, or exiled without warning, women frequently became the unseen architects of clan survival, wielding a form of power that was subtle, resilient, and often devastatingly effective. Their influence flowed through three primary channels: as masters of espionage operating in plain sight, as indispensable diplomatic negotiators, and in moments of absolute crisis, as unexpected military leaders holding the line against annihilation. The role of the spy was perhaps their most natural fit, granted to them by the very prejudices of their era. In the eyes of most government soldiers or rival clansmen, a woman was often beneath notice, part of the scenery, a servant hanging laundry, a farmer's wife selling eggs at a market, or a gentlewoman paying a social call. This perceived invisibility made them perfect intelligence gatherers. A chief's wife or daughter, visiting another household under the pretext of fostering social ties, could listen intently to the boasts of men or the loose talk of servants, absorbing crucial details about troop movements, supply shortages, or internal dissent. This information would then be encoded in letters written in seemingly innocuous domestic language or passed verbally to a trusted Jill run. A line in a letter about the price of wool falling in the north could be a warning that an attack from that direction was imminent. The story of Lady Margaret MacDonald of Sleat is a classic example. During the Jacobite Rising of 1745, while her husband, Sir Alexander, was publicly playing the part of a loyal subject to the government, their home at Monkstadt House in Skye became a secret hub of Jacobite activity. Lady Margaret used her social position to receive and conceal Bonnie Prince Charlie himself, coordinating his movements and supplies while expertly maintaining a facade of placid domesticity to any suspicious government officials who came calling. Her home was a nerve center, and her gender was the perfect camouflage. When conflict escalated beyond the point of espionage, women frequently stepped into the role of peacemaker, a duty that required immense courage and political savvy. In the tense aftermath of a raid or a skirmish, when the men of both sides were boiling with rage and honor demanded retaliation, it was often the women who initiated the first fragile steps toward truce. A wife or mother, related by blood to both feuding families, could serve as a neutral conduit, carrying messages between chiefs who were too proud to meet face to face. Her kinship provided a shield of temporary safe conduct. Perhaps the most famous historical example of this is the story of the Battle of the North Inch of Perth in 1396, a staged judicial combat between 30 champions, each from the Clan Chattan and the Clan Cameron. According to some accounts, the Clan Chattan was initially one man short. A fierce woman from the clan, known only as Maury or Margaret, reportedly stepped forward, insisting she could fight as well as any man. She allegedly disguised herself in armor, took up a sword, and fought bravely, helping to secure a victory for her side. While the legend may be embellished, its persistence speaks volumes about the recognized capability of women in desperate situations. This capability shifted from diplomacy to direct command when a clan faced its darkest hour. If a chief and his tanist, his chosen successor, were both killed or captured, leadership did not simply vanish. It often fell to the chief's widow or eldest daughter to hold the clan together. In these moments, a woman had to become a war leader in fact, if not in name. She would be responsible for organizing the defense of the stronghold, rationing supplies, and motivating the frightened tenants. One of the most striking examples is that of Lady Isabel MacLeod, wife of the chief of Dunvegan in the 16th century. When her husband was away, a war party from the MacDonalds of Sleat landed on MacLeod territory, threatening their people. Instead of locking the gates and waiting for a siege, Lady Isabel reportedly took direct command. She led the clan's fighting men out to confront the invaders, and through sheer force of will and strategic positioning, she successfully drove them back into the sea. Her actions were not recorded in official military annals, but they were immortalized in MacLeod family tradition, a testament to her decisive leadership when the survival of her people was at stake. The power these women wielded was a quiet, persistent force that worked within the cracks of a patriarchal system, not in opposition to it. They understood that their influence was most effective when it appeared to uphold the social order, even as they subtly subverted it for their own clan's gain. A woman's reputation for piety, hospitality, and gentle persuasion was her shield, allowing her to operate in spaces where a man would be viewed with immediate suspicion. Their legacy is a complex one, written not in treaties signed with their names, but in battles that were avoided, in enemies who were misled, and in clans that endured because a woman chose to use her unseen position not for personal gain, but for the survival of the entire community. They were the secret keepers and the knot makers, weaving the threads of alliance and intelligence that often held the fragile world of the clans together long after the swords had been sheathed. The era of secret clan wars did not end with a single, thunderous battle, but with a slow, deliberate, and often brutal process of suffocation. The British government, having finally subdued the Jacobite threat at Culloden in 1746, was determined to ensure such a rebellion could never happen again. Their strategy was not merely to punish the rebels, but to systematically dismantle the very ecosystem that had sustained clan autonomy and its shadow conflicts for centuries. This was a war fought not with broadswords, but with acts of parliament, economic strangulation, and the relentless presence of the redcoat. The first and most symbolic blow was the Disarming Act of 1746, which was far more than a demand to surrender weapons. It made it a criminal offense for any Highlander to possess arms or wear any form of tartan or the kilt. This was a direct attack on the cultural identity of the warrior class. The bagpipes, so crucial for mustering men and boosting morale, were classified as an instrument of war and banned. The goal was to strip the clans of their martial pride, to transform the figure of the Highland fighter from a feared opponent into a disarmed civilian, his most potent symbols rendered illegal and his spirit broken. To enforce this, government troops conducted sweeping searches, burning tartan and confiscating heirlooms, physically erasing the outward signs of a culture built around localized military power. The economic foundations of clan society were targeted with even greater precision. The Heritable Jurisdictions Act of 1747 was a political masterstroke that struck at the heart of a chief's authority. For centuries, clan chiefs had held the power of pit and gallows, the right to hold courts, pass death sentences, and settle disputes within their territories. This legal autonomy was the bedrock of their power, allowing them to manage feuds, enforce their own justice, and operate as near-independent rulers. The act abolished these rights overnight. A chief was now just a landlord in the eyes of the law. His judicial power transferred to royal courts in distant towns like Inverness or Perth, staffed by government-appointed judges. This removed his ability to control the secret wars within his own domain. A cattle raid or a revenge killing was no longer a matter for clan justice. It was a crime for the crown to prosecute, effectively nationalizing law enforcement and ending the centuries-old system of self-regulated conflict. To further weaken the chief's economic grip, the government began to encourage and often force the breakup of the traditional clan landholdings. The old system of duchtjes, the collective right of the clan to the land, was replaced by the concept of oigrecht, where the chief owned the land as private property. This shift allowed chiefs to raise rents exorbitantly, evict tenants who were no longer valuable as fighters but as sources of cash, and ultimately clear the land for the more profitable sheep farming. This process of the Highland clearances shattered the social contract between chief and clansman. The people were severed from the land that gave them identity and purpose, and the human fuel that fed the engines of the secret wars. The loyal kinsmen ready to answer the call was scattered to the winds of emigration. To ensure these new laws were more than just words on paper, the government embarked on a permanent military occupation of the Highlands. A network of fortified barracks and roads was constructed, the most famous being the ones built by General George Wade and his successors. These roads were not built for commerce. They were military supply lines designed to allow the rapid deployment of troops into previously inaccessible glens. Where once a clan could muster in a hidden valley, safe from government interference, they now lived under the constant gaze of a garrison just a day's march away. The founding of Fort George near Inverness, a massive artillery fortress that remains the finest example of 18th century military engineering in Britain, sent an unmistakable message. The Crown's presence was now permanent, overwhelming, and inescapable. The government also co-opted the remaining clan structure for its own ends through the creation of Highland regiments within the British Army. This was a devastatingly clever tactic. It offered a sanctioned outlet for the martial energies of Highland men, channeling their fighting spirit into the service of the very empire that had conquered them. A young man who might have once followed his chief in a raid against the Campbells now found himself wearing a government tartan and fighting for the crown in Canada or India. This not only removed potential rebels from the Highlands, but also created a new economic dependence on army pay, further eroding the old loyalties and making the secret wars of the Glens a distant memory for a new generation. The cumulative effect of these policies was a profound cultural transformation. Within a few generations, the reality of clan warfare faded into the realm of story and song. The events that had once been immediate, bloody realities, the cattle raid, the ambush in the mist, the delicate dance of double alliances, became the stuff of legend, romanticized by writers like Sir Walter Scott for a new audience that viewed the Highlands through a nostalgic lens. The clans themselves were reinvented. The tartan, once banned, was now codified and commercialized with specific sets assigned to surnames by Victorian merchants. What had been a complex, living system of localized power and conflict was repackaged as a colorful heritage industry. The secret wars did not end because the Highlanders lost their will to fight. They ended because the world that made them not only possible but necessary was systematically taken apart, stone by stone and law by law. The government's campaign proved that the most effective way to win a war is to change the world in which your enemy lives, ensuring that even if the desire for conflict remains, the means and the reason for it have vanished forever into the past. The ghosts of these secret wars are not confined to history books. They walk the streets of modern Scotland, whispering from every castle ruin, echoing in family names, and shaping the very identity of the nation in ways both subtle and profound. While the battle cries have faded, the cultural and political contours carved by centuries of clandestine conflict remain deeply etched into the Scottish psyche. The most visible legacy is, of course, the powerful sense of clan identity that persists to this day. This is no longer about mustering fighting men, but about a deep, almost instinctual connection to kinship and place. Scottish diaspora across the globe, from North America to Australia, actively trace their genealogy, seeking that link back to a specific glen or a particular surname, yearning for a sense of belonging to a story larger than themselves. Highland games and clan gatherings are not mere tourist attractions. They are living rituals of remembrance where the pipe bands play, the tartans are worn with pride, and the ancient rivalries are reenacted on the athletic field rather than the battlefield, transforming historical conflict into modern camaraderie and cultural celebration. This historical friction also explains the fierce regional loyalties that can still define Scottish life. The historical distrust between Highlander and Lowlander, or the enduring cultural distinctness of the Gaelic-speaking Outer Hebrides, are direct outcomes of the centuries when these regions operated under different laws, loyalties, and even languages. The political map of modern Scotland, with its strong support for devolution and independence movements, can be partly traced to this deep-seated historical resistance to centralized control from London, a sentiment forged in the fires of resistance against monarchs who sought to impose their will from Stirling and Edinburgh. The memory of the clearances, a direct result of the pacification of the clans, still fuels a powerful undercurrent of land reform activism. a drive to rectify the historical wrongs that severed people from their ancestral homes and redistributed power into the hands of a few wealthy landowners. Economically, the tourism industry thrives on this narrative of mystery and conflict. Visitors don't just come to see beautiful landscapes, they come to walk the bloody soil of Culloden, to feel the chill in the mass grave of Glencoe, and to hear the stories of treachery and heroism attached to every crumbling fortress. This fascination fuels a massive industry of genealogy services, castle tours, and cultural experiences that provide a vital economic lifeline to the rural Highlands and Islands, ensuring that these stories are not just preserved but are actively generating wealth for their communities. Furthermore, the determination to preserve the Gaelic language, once actively suppressed as part of breaking the clan system, is a direct act of cultural reclamation. Every bilingual road sign and Gaelic medium school is a quiet victory in a centuries-long war for cultural survival, a refusal to let the secret histories and songs of the people vanish into the silence of history. Perhaps the most poignant legacy is found in the enduring Scottish character, a unique blend of dour pragmatism, fierce independence, and a wry, dark humor. These are the traits of a people shaped by hardship, by learning to trust their own cunning over distant authorities, and by finding humor in the face of relentless adversity. The concept of Caledonian antisyzygy, the juxtaposition of opposites like gritty realism and romantic idealism, perfectly captures a national spirit forged between the harsh realities of economic survival and the powerful, enduring pull of legend and landscape. To understand Scotland today is to understand that its present is built upon layers of hidden history. The secret wars did not end, they simply evolved, their energy transforming into a passionate politics, a resilient culture, and a proud, complex identity that continues to be written every day by the descendants of the Children of the Mist. Even as we piece together the story of Scotland's secret wars from surviving records and oral traditions, some of the most compelling chapters remain frustratingly blank, their truths lost to time, leaving historians and descendants to grapple with tantalizing, unanswered questions. These are not mere academic curiosities, they are the lingering echoes of betrayals and disappearances so complete that they continue to provoke debate and inspire searches centuries later. The sudden, mysterious vanishing of key figures is one of the most enduring puzzles. Consider the fate of James of the Glens, hanged for the Appin murder. We know the official story, but what became of Alan Breck Stewart, the prime suspect who evaporated into thin air after the shooting? Did he truly escape to France as legend claims, living out his days under an assumed name, forever haunted by the ghost of the innocent man who died in his place? Or did he meet a darker, quieter end in some lonely corner of the Highlands, his body hidden by those who feared what his capture might reveal? His complete disappearance has fueled speculation for centuries, a blank space in history that refuses to be filled. Then there is the haunting mystery of the Lords of the Isles. When their sovereignty was crushed by the Scottish crown in 1493, what happened to the symbols of their power? The official records state that their lands were forfeit and their titles stripped, but the fate of their legendary treasure remains one of Scotland's greatest unsolved riddles. It was said to include priceless religious relics, ancient charters written on vellum, and chests of gold and silver from their continental trade. Was it smuggled out under cover of darkness and buried in a sea cave along a deserted stretch of the Hebridean coast, its location known only to a few loyalists who took the secret to their graves? Or was it systematically dispersed and sold off over generations to finance a quiet resistance, its components now scattered across the globe in private collections, their provenance forever erased? Every few years, a new theory emerges, a new map is studied, or a new stretch of coastline is scanned, but the treasury of the Lords of the Isles continues to guard its secrets. The landscape itself holds clues to other vanishings, particularly the locations of lost strongholds that have simply melted back into the earth. We know from charters and songs that many smaller clans, like the MacQuarries of Ulva or the MacNichols of Scorabreek, had fortified homes, but their exact locations are now guesswork. These weren't grand castles like Edinburgh or Stirling. They were smaller, more intimate tower houses or fortified duns, and when a clan was dispersed or assimilated, their stones were often quarried by neighbors for new buildings, their foundations slowly buried under heather and peat. Finding one is like discovering a ghost. Archaeologists using LiDAR technology now scan hillsides and fields, searching for the telltale geometric shapes of buried walls that could pinpoint the exact seat of a forgotten chief. Each potential discovery promises to rewrite a small piece of the map, to return a name to a specific place and re-anchor a clan story to the very soil it was ripped from. Perhaps the most frustrating mysteries revolve around missing documents. For every treaty like the one signed at Westminster between John MacDonald and England that we know about, there were doubtless dozens of other secret agreements, letters of safe conduct, and private diaries that were deliberately destroyed to protect the living. The personal journal of a figure like the first Earl of Argyll, a master political strategist, would be a priceless Rosetta Stone for understanding the internal machinations of the Chinese letter century. What deals did he make? What promises did he break? Who did he consider his true enemies and who were his secret allies? That journal, if it ever existed, is almost certainly ash. Similarly, the private records of the Gordon chiefs during the height of the Catholic resistance in the Northeast were likely purged to protect families from accusations of treason after the fact. These deliberate acts of historical cleansing mean we are often viewing the past through a keyhole, seeing only a fraction of the whole picture, forced to infer the grand, hidden designs from the scattered and sanitized fragments that survive. This ongoing detective work is what keeps the field of Scottish history so alive and passionately debated. It is not a closed book but an active crime scene, where a storm eroding a sand dune might reveal a skeleton clad in a particular tartan, or a historian cross referencing a merchant shipping ledger in a Dutch archive might find a cryptic entry that confirms a long-theorized smuggling route for Jacobite gold. Each tiny discovery is a piece of the puzzle, helping to complete a portrait of a world that operated in the shadows. These lingering questions ensure that the secret wars are never truly over. They simply moved from the glens and sea lanes into the archives and the high-tech surveyor's toolkit, a continuous effort to listen for the whispers of the past and finally grant them a voice. So where does this leave us, the Scotland we recognize today, with its vibrant tartans, its fierce national pride, its rugged romantic landscapes, was not forged solely on the open battlefields of Stirling or Bannockburn. Its true, deep foundation was laid in the shadows, over centuries of silent, relentless conflict fought by families whose names still echo through the glens. These secret wars were the crucible in which the modern Scottish character was formed. That famous blend of dour pragmatism and soaring romanticism, that deep-seated suspicion of distant authority, and that unbreakable loyalty to kin and community, these are not just cultural traits. They are the direct inheritance of a people who learned to survive by their wits, to trust only their own, and to preserve their identity through cunning and code when open defiance meant destruction. The political landscape, with its enduring tensions between central power and regional identity, its passionate debates over land ownership, and its complex relationship with the wider United Kingdom, is still reverberating from the echoes of those covert struggles. Every time a debate erupts over who truly owns a Highland estate, you are hearing the ghost of the clearances, a direct consequence of the state's final victory in its long, secret war against the clan system. This history is not a closed book. It is a living, breathing presence waiting for you to engage with it. The next time you see a clan tartan, look beyond the pattern. See the hidden messages woven into the set, a language of identity meant to be recognized by allies and adversaries across a smoky battlefield. When you stand before the stark ruins of a castle on a lonely loch, don't just see crumbled stone. Picture the secret passages within its walls, the listening posts where a chief overheard plots, and the postern gate where a family made a desperate midnight escape. This hidden history is all around you, encoded in the place names, whispered in the local legends, and carried in the blood of millions around the world who trace their roots back to these hills. We invite you to become a part of uncovering it. Share your own family stories in the comments below. What names and places have been passed down through your generations? What mysteries remain unsolved? And if you ever get the chance, walk this land yourself. Feel the mist on your face in Glencoe, stand on the windswept shore of Islay and listen closely. The stones themselves have stories to tell, of a Scotland not of singular kings and queens, but of countless families who, in their secret wars for survival, ultimately shaped the